Headliner Radio, the creative voice.
On our little panel today on Headliner Radio, we've got 4 guys here from the audio production, lighting and video worlds. Guys, would you like to introduce yourselves first? We could start maybe with you, Peter, and then we will start talking about the issues that the industry's been facing during this outrageous lockdown that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. My name is Peter Heath. I'm the current Managing Director of PLASA, Professional Lighting and Sound Association. We represent members who supply product and services to the live event industry, as well as other things like corporate and other things, yeah.
Okay. Andy?
So you have to edit that bit out now.
Yeah, it's fine.
I'm Andy Dockerty. I'm the MD of AdLib Audio Limited. We do supply sound, audio, lighting, video equipment, rigging, etc. to all level of events here, there and everywhere. And we also supply all the technicians and the engineers that go with that as well.
And Koy?
Hi, I'm Koy Neminathan. I'm the Sales Director for Avolites. We are a UK manufacturer of stage lighting and video control systems. We've been around since 1976, and it'll be our 45th birthday, so I'm hoping we're still here next year for our birthday. So.
Congratulations, hopefully. And finally, James.
Hi there, I'm James Gordon, CEO of Audiotonix, which is the parent company for a number of brands in the pro audio space. So brands like Digico that do live sound events, theatre shows, festivals. We have Calric that does broadcast live to air for sporting events. We have Solid State Logic, best known for its music recording, but also does broadcast equipment and also live sound equipment. Allen and Heath, which is very popular in the DJ community, as well as regional rental and national rental as well for audio production. And I've forgotten one. Oh, Clang for in-ear monitoring, immersive in-ear monitoring.
Okay, great.
So we cover a number of brands that pretty much go into the event space.
Well, that's it, isn't it? The event space. And where else do we begin there? I mean, it's been a mad few months. It's good to, as I say, to see friendly faces, but faces that will obviously be a bit perturbed today, maybe, or just generally. But the government announcement today of £1.5 billion pounds going into the arts. It sounds great, and it is great, but it's not really going to fix the problem that we've got by any means, is it? Peter, we could maybe start with you, because you could tell us a little bit about your hashtag campaign, We Make Events, and how do you feel today after that announcement, when you really dig into it and realize what is and what isn't actually being helped?
Well, I think like a lot of the government announcements, there's a measure of, well, thank you, that's really appreciated. But then when you look under the surface of it, you realize that it actually doesn't reach many of the people that need to be helped. So our understanding, which is fairly basic at the moment because no detail has been released, that it's really out there to help theatres, museums, art galleries, and music venues, which is brilliant. And also they want to look after our crown jewels, venues such as the Royal Albert Hall, which was their example. Mm. But what it doesn't do, it doesn't ring particularly well with our hashtag We Make Events campaign, which is really about the supply chain to the events industry. And the way that this particular area seems to fall through all the gaps in everyone's thinking and everyone's actions. So the campaign is really there to try and alert and get support for those people, and to get the government to recognise that we exist and what a contribution we make to the events industry, and the fact that there wouldn't be an events industry without the supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely right. Would any of you, I guess you'd all like to say quite a bit on this, would you like to take it in turns to give maybe an example of how you think this will or will not help any of you guys respectively? Koy, do you want to kick us off on that?
Yeah, if you take a look at the supply chain diagram, you take a look and see that manufacturers are right at the bottom. We rely on rental companies and production companies like AdLib, who then say, hey, we want this product for this particular tour, we want this product for this particular festival. And we're right at the bottom here. So if they don't have that generation of business, we can produce, innovative, great products all day long with zero sales. No one's going to want these products. So, we really rely on that chain. And unfortunately, us as a manufacturer, we sit right at the bottom. So that's really, really concerning for me.
And would you echo that, James? I mean, you've got various companies to think about as well, all of which do similar things, but they will be affected slightly differently, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I think it's back to the ethos of, we were the first ones to stop working, and we'll definitely be the last ones to go back to work. And I think, the news that they're going to support the venues and the music venues and the theatres, that's fantastic, but that's not the whole picture. There's a whole community of people that feed into those and generate the shows that go on. It's not just the cast you see on stage or good timing or the venue that happens to be running there. It's also, as Koy said, manufacturers making equipment that allow shows to be more creative and more artistic, and production companies like the one Andy runs, AdLib, there that put those shows on, and working for them. There are obviously staff that work in the companies, but as we know, 70+% of our industry is made up with freelancers, and it's looking after all of those people, not just the venues, because the venues are great, but they kind of need the talent to go into the room and put those productions. And obviously for Koy and I, they need the equipment to deliver world-class shows that are the envy internationally, actually. And that's what this UK does,
Absolutely. And something like 100 billion to the national economy?
Yeah, approximately.
Yeah. And on this, Andy, I mean, like James says, on the production side, a lot of people won't realise how many, and understandably so, how many bodies it takes to actually put shows on, and how many people are actually affected by what's going on now. As a knock-on effect, families of however many hundreds of people every show, and it goes into the tens of thousands. You've got a couple of hundred people normally on your workforce, and 80-90% off at the moment with furlough.
Yeah, we've got 167 full-time staff, but we also provide works for, up to 200 freelancers at any given moment in time. Of the full-time staff, we've currently got 155 furloughed. And I think as well, it's not just that the fact that these guys are out of work at the minute. It's more we need to protect them and make sure they're available to come back. And I think we are all thinking, the general consensus is that we're looking at, mass gathering. We're out of work till mass gatherings happen. It's as cut and dried as that. And you can't just look at one sector, i.e. the theatre sector, and say, if they're back in, then it's all back in. So it might be that the theatres are back in before arenas, for argument's sake. And I think it's important that we understand it's when arenas are back in full that we can say we're back in and we're working, because that's where the majority of our staff work. And maintaining that very, very specialist skill sector, which will not be available from a job centre in March or April next year. You just can't go and, if you're on Amazon, you need 100 drivers, you can go and find 100 drivers. You can't go and find 100 sound engineers, lighting technicians, video technicians out your job centre just when you need them. Getting them to the skill set that you require, it's not even as if they're coming out of college with the qualifications that are required either. We are spending a minimum of 3 to 5 years with any technician that comes through from a college before we even allow them anywhere near going out on a live gig. So it's imperative that these people are protected and kept, because a lot of them these days are that talented that they can be headhunted into other industries, into other sectors for probably more money and half the hours. They do this because they absolutely love it, but there will be a point comes where needs must. So it's imperative that we protect a lot of these people right the way through. But we as businesses, we can't do it. It's like there's no money left in our kitties. There really isn't. So we need that help to know that the freelancers, our own technicians, can be supported till the industry is back working, not when people think it's back working, but when it's actually back working. And that's the bit that worries me. If theatres are open and allowed to do things, even without audiences in, that will bring a section of people back in, but only a small part of of the technicians that are actually out there. So that's a big fear of mine, making sure that we've got the people when we need them, but looking after them between now and then.
And with the theatre thing, just quickly, you're going to have to fill a lot of space. I don't know the full margins. You might have a lot more of an idea than me, but you've got to fill theatres to make money there, haven't you?
Well,
so
as I understand it, it's about 80% for the theatre on an average house, and 90%, believe it or not, in an arena.
Is it really? I would never have guessed it'd be that high.
Well, particularly in arena shows, if you speak to a lot of the promoters, it's the figures that they're paying the artists in that particular world is ridiculous. Now, it depends on the nature of the artist. A lot of those artists put a lot of that money back into their show, and a lot of them take the money and run. It depends where they are in their career path and what it is that they need to do. But from a promoter's point of view, their break-even figures for a lot of the arena shows apparently are 90%.
Wow.
It's really, really interesting statistic. Sorry to jump in.
No, please.
It was Ollie Jeffrey at one of the PLASA meetings we had recently. He was at the Royal Albert Hall, mentioned that the 2-metre social distancing rule, if that's still in effect, he would fill up 26% of the Royal Albert Hall. If it was reduced to 1 metre, it'd be 33%. And that was just shocking.
Right.
You know, that just really explains the story very, very clearly. And what I still don't understand is, you know, the government has put in this package and said, right, 1.5 billion, great. However, so you can sit on a train for a couple of hours, you can sit on a plane for a few hours, but you can't sit next to the person in a theatre for a few hours to watch a show. That really baffles me, you know, and that's a separate discussion, separate argument, but it really does throw
an argument. So this when this was put to Oliver Dowden this morning, his argument for this is all to do with aging infrastructure within theatres. So the age of the building, the density of the way that the seating is laid out, and to do with a movement of air and flow of air. So while you've got, you know, on an aeroplane or outside, it's regarded as considerably safer than it might be in a theatre. And whilst that, I think there's some validity to that, I think people are getting less and less convinced with the government's arguments. Yeah,
and if you look at the live, I mean, you look at things like Live Aid, any of the great big concerts where what's happened is, you know, something dreadful in the world has happened, or you want to just put something together and raise money for some terrible tragedy, or just for an area of the world maybe that's having a poverty issue or whatever it might be, then it's always the creative industries that steps up and delivers these insanely amazing shows or events. And now it is kind of flipped on its head, where it really is a case of we need the people now, and the government, maybe that be as well, to help the live industry. It really is a very unique situation. I mean, we know that, but it's such a flipped on its head totally, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, that is one of the comments I've been using recently, that, you know, we are the industry that everybody's come to when they want to do a charity event.
Right, yeah.
Now, all of a sudden, we are that charity. And I think the biggest problem we have with that is that we are an industry that is used to giving. So it's very, very difficult to and I think we all find it difficult to ask. You know, it's like, well, we'll willingly give, but then when we need something, I find that it's not natural for us as an industry to go to somebody to be asking for something. Certainly on the service side of the industry, you know, I think we're always going to be the first port of call. And then, to be fair, it does go down that supply chain quite regularly. You know, it might be that I'll always speak with reference to audio because that's my background, but it might be, oh, James, we've got this big charity event on here and we need 3, you know, SD7 Quantums. We've only got 2. Can we borrow one, please? You know, so it does go, the relationships are unique in our industry right the way across the board. And that whole supply chain, from the venue space that you need to do the show in, to the performer and the promoter, to us in the middle. If any one of that bit breaks, then you haven't got anything, the whole thing's finished. So it's imperative that if this is phase 1 of the theatres and the venues being looked after to make sure there's a place to go, fantastic. But then phase 2 and phase 3 needs to be for the promoters to still be there, to be putting the shows on for people to go and buy tickets and go. And then phase 2 needs to be in the middle, which will be the likes of us, because otherwise, if you can go, it could be awfully quiet and awfully dark unless we're all in there. So across all the different bits, it's a very, very brittle supply chain. So keeping the venues open is great. Some of those venues are self-contained. Most of them aren't. And then when you get into arenas and the bigger theatres, they are all blank canvases for a reason. So they can do anything that they want, whether that be in an arena, it could be an exhibition, or it could be any particular show. But they are all blank canvases that, without our will to serve it, are nothing. So,
no, please go on, mate. Please.
I was just going to say, I was just going to, just labour that point that the supply chain is very, very brittle through from the artist to the promoter to the production company to the venue and to the suppliers and the manufacturers. It's a very brittle chain, and it all needs to be supported, not just a part of it.
Yeah, very, very well put. I mean, what are we actually calling for then, do you think? In the ideal world, what do we need the government to do? Like you say, if there is a second and third phase. Yeah, please, James.
I think it's interesting. So we have around 550 people worldwide. Predominantly they're in the UK because we're a UK manufacturer. We do all of our R&D, majority of our manufacturing here as well. But we also have a company I mentioned earlier, Klang, that are in Germany, and their furlough scheme for their segment, their category, is running through to March next year. So they've got the furlough scheme through to March on the basis that for their industry, they don't envisage it coming back until March. Now, something like that, I think would give probably all of us on this call actually a little bit of comfort, because I'd love to have our full factory workforce in Hebden Bridge or Scotland or Oxford all flat out working right now. I mean, that would be our aspiration. We were planning on hiring a load of new people this year as the business has grown consistently for the last 10 years. And we were looking at hiring more. And I'd love it to be the situation. But right now, if our customers can't go to work, then they're not going to be buying our equipment. So we don't need to be manufacturing at full capacity. But as Andy mentioned, we've spent years training our workforce to understand the demands that our products are put under. We've spent years training them on the idiosyncrasies in our design and what we want, and making sure we're making the best products we can make to be a world leader, which, all of the brands in fact, on this call, because I can include Avolites in that, are brand leaders. The UK has a particularly good track record of that in our industry. And I would actually like similar support for our UK businesses as we have for our German one, actually, because I think the German government's done a really good job of going, actually, for your sector, and it is different for all. I'm not saying it should be for everybody, but depending on what your industry is, if you're not able to go back to work because of the legislation that's stopping you, and that's pretty much true, because as Koy said, there is no way a theatre can run at 33%. There's no way a tour can. That means that we are basically unable to go to work at full capacity, at least, and we should be supported until the point where you can sell tickets and people can go to live events, because we're actually not able to do the jobs that we want to be doing. So it's not our fault as businesses we're not able to work. It's the legislation that is preventing us from going to work at this point. And we're all in the position, I think, now where we're looking at our staff that we spent years building and growing and building a culture within our businesses. And we're looking at that going, we've got to work out how we can carry this staff through, probably in our industry to Q1 next year at the earliest, I would think. I mean, no one makes any money through rehearsals. It's only when the productions actually go into being live shows. With real singing, actually, that's worth pointing out, probably, that you do actually have to sing as well. And at that stage, that is the level of support. Now we're starting, because we're 90% of what we manufacture is exported, so we're starting to see a lifeline coming through internationally where we are supplying equipment. Much lower levels than we would ordinarily be doing at this time, but we are starting to bring staff back. So I don't want to sit here with everybody on furlough. I'd love everybody off furlough by the end of if it was extended, I'd love them all off by the end of 2020. But in reality, I don't think we're going to be fully back to work until probably March of next year.
Are there many? How many of your whole staff, James? How many are furloughed at the moment?
It's around between 40 and 45% at the moment.
Right. And what about at your end, Koy?
Yeah, it's roughly sort of similar figures, actually, sort of like 50%. And that's the guys who actually build the product. You know, the first thing we did, knowing this is all going downhill back in March, was, you know, let's just ensure let's get enough stock on the shelf. So we had the guys building everything up on the shelf, and then ultimately, you know, sales were trickling along. And like James says, you know, our business is 80% export. So, you know, we have these projects around the world which were, you know, bringing in some sales, but not enough for us to get all these individuals back. The point I wanted to try and make was it's about retention as well. You know, we've got a number of talented individuals. You know, we've got developers and programmers, and, you know, we've got these great sales team and these engineers who we've nurtured. You know, we've really grown within the organization, who have grown within the organization. And what would be a real disaster is for these individuals not to have a job.
Well, I imagine here's a question for you, Koy, because I don't know if it's the same for you, but we took the decision that we wouldn't furlough anyone in R&D. So we have just over 200 of our workforce are R&D engineers, world class, I think, but you know, I'm probably a bit biased with that. And we have kept those all working because that's our investment into our future as a company, but also the industry and I guess the country as well as a greater. Because if we stopped that investment, which we're obviously not being supported with, but if we stopped that investment, that would be us pretty much saying that there wasn't a future. And I firmly believe there is a future. I just think we need a bit of help getting to it, and then we can get back to growing the industry and growing our business internationally as an industry.
Peter, you want to say something there?
You know, we recently we've been doing a number of surveys, and one of the surveys was about how much cash did our members have in order to get them through this particular time. And out of the ones that responded, which was the majority of them responded, said that we have about 3 months worth of cash left. So, and this was done at the beginning of June. So we're talking that we're coming to the halfway point where they, even with support they've had, they're going to be running out of cash. So when the furlough scheme ends, this is when the conversation that Koy and Andy and James are having about their talented people, then the big decisions are made. Do I hang on to these people, or do I have to let them go? And this is what one of the biggest things we've got to try and get through to the government, which is the decimation of this part of the industry if they don't act.
I think on top of that, what we have to appreciate, you know, we've more or less said here that we're looking at, you know, a potential March, April return next year. You know, literally in our world, the 20th of March, you know, the big switch was hit and that was it. And in our world, there's nothing or very, very little. And if you consider the period of time that we'll have been out, percentage-wise, it's going to be longer than any other industry. Therefore, percentage-wise, our losses are greater than any other sector. And that's where the grants need to come in, not the loans. Because, you know, how can you fund what could ultimately be 12 months of no income? Yeah. You can't, you know, and as pointed out, it's not through the lack of business. You know, I think, you know, everyone here, this industry has actually been developing rapidly. It was probably the largest growing industry, was it, in something like 2018-19? And, you know, AdLib alone for 12 years consecutively has grown between 10 and 14% each year. So it's not as if we're an industry that was beginning to fall by the wayside. We absolutely weren't. We were a growth industry. And for all those losses, for 12 months worth of basically your income to disappear, I think the knock-on effect from the rental houses as how that will affect the manufacturers is immense. It goes back to that whole supply chain thing. But in a nutshell, really, it needs to be accepted and appreciated that we will have been out longer than anybody else. Therefore, our percentage losses are greater. Therefore, capital support is essential. Alongside the points that have already been raised about maintaining the staff through till when we actually do return to work. Because, you know, I would suggest if you gave most people that opportunity to go back to work tomorrow and allow them for what was going on, they would, but they can't because it's illegal.
Yeah.
So, it's not our fault, so I'm not blaming the government there. It's not their fault either. This is just
No.
a very, very unfortunate set of circumstances. But, they unfortunately do hold the purse strings and need to be helping. And it's
So-
great. It's great that they've started.
It is, yeah.
To be appreciated.
Yeah,
that
I
it's
mean,
a start. It's not
big improvement on where we were a week ago, for sure.
Absolutely right. Yeah. So basically, supporting this sector through capital grants for companies throughout, that entire supply chain is the key thing, isn't it? An extension to the furlough scheme, and I guess to the self-employed support scheme as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're the three prongs, really, aren't they?
Yeah.
How do we get them to do that? I know I don't mean, I laugh nervously. How
do a
how is the
podcast.
massive? Yeah. How is that message going to be? Because you'll see things like I don't know how many thousand people an airline might have made redundant or have gone on furlough or have gone under. Terrible. It's really, really harsh on everybody. But this is such a huge number, and the amount of lives we're talking about here, like I mentioned, that domino effect of then families that are then maybe not getting the right income because of mum or dad isn't bringing it in because they're furloughed, or the whole industry. I mean, the big number is way worthy of a larger headline, I think.
Well, we're an invisible industry, aren't we? It's like everyone wears black, everybody hides. You see what you do, you hear what we do, but you don't see or hear who we are.
Yeah.
And I think with that in mind, the amount of numbers of people who are actually doing this, and that's because it was pointed out before, 72% of which are single person operation freelancers who haven't really got a massive voice in any way, shape or form. Organizations like ours who, maybe have up to nearly 200 people involved with us. As a set of collectives, it's not big enough to make that stance that you need in some.
No, it's not. Yeah.
Like PLASA have been great, PSA have been great.
Mm.
But I think as a collective, it just needs to be seen what it is and what it's worth. And it's a unique skill set that is a world leader, as we pointed out before. And most of these freelancers are also, setting the benchmark for how the world works within our industry. And I think getting the message over now needs to be coming a little bit more from us. We need to be visible. It goes back to what I said before. We've been excellent at being the company that gives, or the organisation. I didn't mean that to sound like advocate,
Yeah.
but in the industry that gives.
Yeah.
And because of that, we very rarely ask. And I think now it needs to be recognised who it is, what they do, and what they need. And how we do that, to go back to your question, is as much as we can lobbying. Over to Koy.
Sorry, I know Peter. You had your hand up.
Peter, they're in a race. No, it's great. Thank you, Andy. That you're absolutely right, guys. Yeah, one at a time. Peter, Koy, either one.
So this issue about being recognised was something that we found out a few years ago during a European lighting regulation. So we were part of a number of associations that were trying to get the EU to recognise our sector. So the lighting regulations come out. They come out every 5 years, which is, you need to reduce power consumption here. You need to reduce this. You need to do this. You do that.
Right.
And we went to them saying, well, you can't because our industry. They were going, well, no, you can, because they had all these ridiculous numbers around how much power was being consumed by a theatre, because they assumed every single lamp that was used in a production was on 24/7.
Right.
So they go, well, you're consuming massive, and it took an awful long time before the EU finally recognised us as a sector. So now, when it comes to regulations, whether it's to do with lighting regulations or the recent ROHS regulations, because we've finally been recognised, they will come and talk to us as a sector. And I think the only way we're going to change our position is to get the government to recognise us, so they can come and talk to us as a sector and at least get some feedback. And that's our big deal.
Okay. Koy?
I completely agree with Andy. I think, what he said about us being in the background, we're not recognised for what we do. But I think what we do need, and maybe it's just coincidence, because, we've had this, we make events, hashtag we make events, hashtag, let the music play. And on the weekend, it was fantastic, to have the likes of Coldplay, Emily Evis, Sir Paul McCartney, all these big names who finally got behind And that's what we probably need. We need a voice. You know, I remember years ago, Joanna Lumley and the Gurkhas. You know, they wouldn't listen to them until you get a big celebrity comes along and says, right, listen to these.
Yeah.
Maybe we need more, you know, bigger names, a powerful voice to make our, you know, sector heard. I think that's what we need. We need to get going. And I private messaged Lily Allen, you know, on Instagram just to see if she'd, you know, push that hashtag across, and, you know, Emily Evis. But a few days later, they got on board, and a few days later after that, we get this, you know, this whole 1.5 billion, which is fantastic. But maybe we do need a little bit more of a push with another, you know, big name celebrity to voice our concerns.
Do you think that we're in danger then of that? If that is the lot, let's hope it's not. But if that is the lot, the 1.5 billion, then we are in trouble a little bit, aren't we? You know, if they're not gonna, if there's a stage 2 or a stage 3, like Andy hopefully suggested, and it might well be that they add more for Just Live or whatever it might be. I'm just wondering, you know, like so many people are going to get missed out of this.
I think that's it's not so much the amount of money, because the amount of money, I mean, probably sounds impressive to us all actually, but
yeah,
it's how that money's going to get allocated.
Yes,
I think that, you know, it's always the challenge. And as Andy said, you know, we've got a large percentage of our workforce in our industry is freelance. You know, they travel a lot. They're away potentially 9 months of the year touring with their artists or whatever. So they're not the ones that have the best infrastructure around them at home to be able to help them navigate some of this. And it's true of the companies, as Andy says. You know, we're not the ones that like to go out and ask for help first. You know, we're normally the ones that try and help others, because I think in a creative space, that's what you try and do. You know, you want to help. Certainly with society, and it's a challenge. And I think the amount of money's fine. It's just, does it reach into all the right places, and how's it going to be allocated is my first question. And obviously it's too early to answer that yet. And our job now, I think, is to highlight the breadth, because quite often a lot of people, when I talk to my friends not in the industry, will go, oh, well, you know, that particular artist, they can afford it. And it's like, yes, the artist probably can, but you've got to think about all of the people that support and put those productions into place, the manufacturers, the people that are doing the merchandise sales. I mean, our industry, I mean, Andy can give you some idea on a tour, but, you know, it's not unusual to be over 150 people touring with a band. And those 150 people right now are all sat at home. For every band you've ever been to see, you know, everybody mentioned Glastonbury last weekend, because that obviously is a fantastic festival, but there are hundreds of festivals that run in the UK and across Europe, and a lot of the UK acts and therefore the UK staff, the freelancers, the production companies, put those festivals on across Europe as well. All of that stopped this summer. So there is no income for those people this summer, and they'll have to wait until next summer, because summer is where those festivals really generate a revenue for our industry.
And absolutely right, James. And Andy, I mean, I think I'm right in thinking that 3-month period for you is astronomical, isn't it?
Yeah, we do probably about 50% of our annual income in that 3-month window.
Right. Wow.
It's huge, you know, because you're not only doing as many festivals as you physically can a lot of the time, but also a lot of the artists that you look after will take out a control package as well. So you're supplying stacks, racks, and a full system to every festival, plus a lot of touring control packages, which will obviously you comprise of your full monitor systems, mic stands, packages, etc.
And therein is our problem, Paul, as well, because everybody on this call understands exactly what Andy just explained.
Yeah.
But people out of our industry wouldn't know that that's a tour going out with lots of trucks full of speakers, as well as the mixing console and the lighting console and all the other bits, as opposed to a production that's just taking, you know, the console and the artist's requirements, as opposed to traveling around with a full speaker system. And there are so many variables that put on those productions that a lot of people don't understand the amount of people and the resources that are required to do the shows that they go and see. And that's, you know, we're paid not to be noticed. In fact, when we get noticed, it's normally because something's gone wrong, and no one wants to get noticed. So we hide away in the shadows. And now I think we're trying to come out of the shadows, which is a little bit unusual for us.
Yes. Yeah, it's really well put, actually. Peter, you got anything to add on that side?
I think the guys said it all. I think the fallout, if we don't get us to get a resolution or some resolution to what we're asking for is there are a number of things that are going to happen. I think apart from losing all the skilled people that these guys have built up years working and training with, we're going to have another impact, which is if we don't have live events, or certainly have live events in the way that we know of them, it's going to have an impact on the public too, because public want to go and spend their money on stuff they like doing, and they like going to gigs and they like going to theatre. And if they can't do that, then what else might they do that might make them feel as good as that? Maybe they will struggle, and maybe there's another pressure then to build up on the NHS because you've got millions of people not doing things that make them happy.
I think that leads into another social issue, doesn't it? I mean, we need to be back as quick as we can be, and safely, I get that. But youngsters are more and more now already taking their own course. There's an illegal party or rave or whatever you want to call it every weekend happening now up and down the country. And that is only going to magnify. And I think if you were to open arenas tomorrow, and I don't believe we should be yet, by the way, but if we were, I think any show with an average age of under 40 would sell out and no one would give a damn about the consequence. I think an average audience between 40 and 60, you might think about it, and your next Cliff Richard's all going out, then no one's going. If it's 60 or above, I think that age group will definitely think twice. But I think for the majority of the events and shows and gigs that we're doing and festivals, I have no fear for the future. I have a fear of getting there. I think our industry will come back and it'll be big. I think people want to go to shows. I think it'll be very tight. I think margins are going to be tighter than they've ever been for a period of time. But I think there'll be probably a lot more to offer than there's been for a long, long period of time. But it's who's going to be there to deliver that. And that's the fear that you've got. I think, unless everyone's protected till the April and the Mays, and that's providing there's no massive second spike, then I think the industry will be fine. But between now and then is just a massive scare. Who's going to come through it? There's going to be a lot of casualties, whichever way this goes.
Yeah.
Now till April, May, regrettably.
Yeah, I completely agree. Koy, you mentioned let the music play. As you say, everybody got to support everybody. Is it a good thing to have several of these, or should you all be under the same roof, so to speak?
Well, I think there's two answers. I think ideally it would be grand if we could all work under the same roof to do that. But that not being the case, I think Let the Music Play was a great angle to come at, and they did extraordinarily well, and they're doing extraordinarily well.
I think from my perspective, anything that gets the industry noticed is important. Yeah. I think you've got to remember that PLASA is looking at everything from the rental companies to the manufacturers, so they cover a large segment of our industry. And I think statistically, seeing the numbers of the whole industry was quite scary. None of us, as Andy said, we all focus on what we're doing. But when you start hearing numbers of 600,000-700,000 people, that's a serious number of people that are working in this country in our industry. Yeah. And then you can see the different segments and what each one of those segments are, because there's theatre sound, there's touring sound, there's festivals, there's music venues, there's grassroots stuff, there's corporate AV, there's a huge amount of companies doing corporate AV, and whether that's you going to a car show and the audio and the visuals that you get when you see a car show, right the way through to banking, and AGMs. In fact, someone needs to sort out the audio in the Houses of Commons right now, because it's not as good with half the seats empty. You're getting a lot more bounce back off the leather. So I think our industry has a lot to do with a lot of things that you see. You don't necessarily know it's going on in the background, and I think there are lots of segments that are very worried about their future. And I think there's a light up thing today where a lot of the venues are going to light up red today.
That's right. Yeah.
anything that makes people realize the significance of the events business and the festivals, the theatre shows, all of them. I mean, I guess Koy and I have a vested interest in them all because we supply them all. But actually, from an industry and from a nation's perspective, that helps to generate a huge amount of regard for our segment internationally. And that's pretty cool too. The UK has led its way in terms of the events. A lot of our freelancers get jobs in America because they have the talent to do the productions, and they go globally, and that's great. And I'm sure Andy's got employees that have worked for him that have left AdLib and are now touring the world representing what we do as a country, but also what we do as companies. So that's the bit I fear the most. I think we need to be post-Brexit supplying these equipments and shows worldwide and proving that the UK can stand alone, and that's pretty critical right now.
Brexit, that's a word we haven't heard for a little while. God, let's not go there.
Well, in reality, though, this is a time where the UK needs to rely an awful lot more on homegrown talent, UK companies, and the skills that we have as a nation. And losing those skills is a big deal right now.
Yes. That 600,000 number, by the way, Jack, as shocking as it is, when you think of the direct family members, there it's probably nearer 2 million, isn't it? The actual lives that are being affected. Absolutely
that's
crazy.
just the employees, not their families that sit beneath them. No.
Exactly that. Exactly. Well, gents, thank you so much for this. It was really lovely to talk to you. Hopefully it'll be in real life soon. And let's just hope that they come, like you said, Andy, let's hope there is a phase 2 and hopefully even a phase 3 of this government funding. And like you said, James, not just about the money, it's about where it's going. That's the key, isn't it?
Next few weeks are going to be critical.
Yeah, absolutely. Gents, thank you so much. Lovely to talk to you, and stay safe.
Okay.
Cheers,
Cheers, guys.
Cheers, team. Take care.
Have we finished now?
Headliner Radio, supporting the creative community.